the museum back to life.
You know, people sit out on the front porch hoping people will come by.
Go forth and do good.
It's insane. I have the most understanding wife in the world.
I treat everybody the same thing.
Oh, that's the other thing I love about Marietta. It's like a melting pot.
You are listening to Marietta Stories. Each week, veteran podcaster Bill Nowicki brings you the heartwarming, interesting, and fun stories from the people that make the community of Marietta, Georgia, a place to call home. Here's your host, Bill Nowicki.
So I have Vivian and Alejo, and their last names are?
Hansen de los Rios.
And?
Porras de los Rios.
All right. So you guys are newly married, new couple with a new baby. How old's your baby?
He is almost 8 months now.
Yeah. And what's his name?
Caspian de los Rios.
No Hansen?
No, we just thought it'd be much simpler for him to only have the one last name.
Caspian. Where'd you come up with that?
You know, it was actually Alejo's idea, but as soon as he said it, I thought it was perfect because we are both bibliophiles. We love to read, and we do have a shared favorite, which is The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. And in one of his books, Prince Caspian was the title character there. And so that was Alejo's idea, and we just both immediately attached to it. So
yeah. Well, and it's a little weird seeing Alejo here without his pad and drawing sketches. Why don't you have your pad ready to go?
It's right there.
It's never far behind.
It's never far behind. I have to bring it with me all the time.
Yeah, you posted something on social media where you were, I think, driving and...
Yes.
You weren't driving, but well, you were on a drive.
Yeah, I was coming back from Knoxville yesterday.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and I was just by the side, you know, next to the driver, and at some point I was like, I just want to draw, and he was like, go for it, man.
Well, your stuff is beautiful, and we met at Sewell Mill Library and Cultural Center for the Storytelling Festival, and I remember you guys had a booth set up, and we'll talk a little bit more about your art, but the thing that jumped out at me is Alejo is just smiling from ear to ear. And I wasn't quite sure why, but I think you're just a kind of a happy guy.
Yeah, I am. I was just happy to be out and...
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, okay.
The smile, though, is the first thing I noticed about him. We met a few years ago when we were still in school, because he just wears that smile all the time. Doesn't matter what he's doing, he's smiling and drawing. That's just him.
Except when I'm hungry.
When you're hungry, you don't smile?
No, I don't. I get hangry.
Hangry? Boy, you're learning some advanced words here in the U.S.
Well, as Vivian might tell, she thinks I'm a hobbit, and I agree with her. I need to eat like constantly, and when I don't, I get like very quiet and sometimes a little bit moody. But
well, let's start back at the beginning. Vivian, tell me where you grew up. I think the South, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I grew up in South Mississippi, and then I did my studies, my first set of studies anyway, at the northern part of Mississippi, and then needed a change of pace, so I moved to Japan. After I finished saving up there, I came back to Atlanta so I could attend the Savannah College of Art and Design, and then right before I finished up with my studies there, I moved to their main campus in Savannah, Georgia, and while I was there, I met a cute Costa Rican boy named Alejo, and...
You went through like 20 years of your life in about 15 seconds. Pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was kind of all over the place, but I ended up exactly where I needed to be. So.
Well, let's go back to your life in Mississippi. What was your childhood like?
I actually had a really nice, peaceful childhood out in the countryside. I just went to a regular public school. It was very small. It was very everything. Everyone knew each other. We grew up, you know, kind of what they call free range now, running down the street, close to nature all the time. We did a lot of camping in a real tent, no cell phones. I was always really close to nature growing up, and that's been something that's been an important part of my life since then, I feel like.
All right. So did you really take to drawing and art?
You know, initially I did not, because I'm one of 3 siblings, and when you're one of 3, especially for the middle kid, you realize that everybody kind of gets a title. So my older brother, was the artist, quote, of the family. I was the musician. I picked up things really quickly when I was younger, and then I started playing flute. I played flute actually all the way through college. The first time it got me a scholarship, and I really enjoyed that. But it wasn't until almost at the end of my junior year of high school before I actually did a study abroad program. I went to Ireland, and I went to a high school in Ireland there, and at that point, you know, when you go somewhere different, you have the chance to kind of do things that are unusual because people don't know what to expect from you. I took an art class while I was there, and the art teacher, he was really something different. I had never experienced something like that, being that kind of, had this chance to be an individual, you know, somebody different from my siblings, somebody different from the tiny town I was from. And one day, my Irish art teacher came by looking at some of my work, and he just said, "You're an artist." It was just like it wasn't a question. It wasn't, you know, he wasn't looking for a response there. And I kind of let that sink in for a minute. But by the time I was able to return home and start thinking about college options, that sentence kind of kept coming back into your mind, like, hey, you're an artist.
Well, did you consider yourself an artist playing the flute?
I really enjoyed it, but I would say that I ended up with a minor disappointment on that level. I realized at some point, right before I made my decisions for college, that the education that I was getting was pretty severely subpar as far as music goes. While I was a big fish in a little pond, but as soon as I got outside of that pond, I realized that my musical education was severely lacking, and that if I started off college trying to study music, I would have been at a severe disadvantage. And I kind of panicked, and I worried about my identity, who I am, you know, if I'm not a musician, who am I? And then I realized that I had this thing that I had been doing all along. I looked back and I thought, you know, even before I was doing music, I have always been drawing and writing stories. I have just tons of sketchbooks and all these things. I would, you know, in class when I was a little kid, as soon as I finished, I'd flip over the paper and I would start drawing, or I would write a story and then do a little drawing to go with it. And once you realize all the kind of the puzzle pieces start coming together and say, this is who I've been all along. And I've just been afraid to pursue that because I wasn't the, quote, artist of the family.
So the teacher kind of threw you off a little bit, and it sounded like you reflected on it.
Exactly. Yeah, it made me think a lot.
So how old were you when that happened?
I think I was 17, actually. I feel kind of, I arrived to the art scene kind of late in the game. You know, a lot of people that I met in art school were like, oh, I've been doing this since I was 5. Like, I knew from the start this was what I would do. And it was just one of those things where I realized much later that I had been allowing, I guess, the kind of labels, you know, that I wasn't, since I wasn't labeled the artist of the family, that I couldn't do that. And as soon as I got outside of that tiny space, and I was able to do things, you know, where people didn't know me at all whatsoever, that I was able to kind of experiment with this. And I realized, you know, I was pigeonholing myself and kind of pushing myself away from something that I had always loved.
But weren't you worried about being a big fish, or a big fish in a small pond, or the opposite, because you weren't hanging out with artists?
Absolutely. And as you know, if students, I went to college and said that, you know, I wanted to study art, this is what I'm going to do, of course I was afraid. And I get there and rapidly realized that while I may not have had the practice that a lot of the other people there had, I still had the passion for it, and that there was still a knack for it, so that I immediately not only caught up, but found myself surpassing, at least in that environment, so that by the time I graduated, I actually got the Studio Art Award for that year and graduated summa cum laude, despite having kind of been a beginner, you know, as far as all that went. Yeah.
All right, let's go to Alejo here. Now, tell me about your background. Quit grabbing your wife's leg.
Well,
it's hard for you to sit this close without doing it.
Well, I'm from...
How long have you guys been married, by the way?
We've been married for 3 years. Well,
2.5.
2.5, yeah. Well,
2.5 years.
31 months. Something like that, yeah.
Good with math, too.
So we go on a monthly date on the day that we were married, which was the 16th of October. So every 16th of the month, we go on a date, and so we know pretty much which month that is.
Where'd you go this 16th May?
16th, we actually, I think we stayed here.
We had to postpone it, actually. So this Saturday, this Saturday we're going on a date. So
yeah, on Saturday we're going to actually the Sewell Mill. They have like a swing dance.
Oh, Sewell Mill.
Yeah, they have like a swing dance thing.
singing there, and we haven't danced in a while, so it's gonna be fun.
Sounds great. All right, back to you. Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up farther south, much farther south.
New Orleans?
No, I'm from Costa Rica, which is not an island. It's
Why is that a joke?
Because a lot of people is like, oh, Puerto Rico. I'm like, no, Costa Rica. So yeah, I'm from Costa Rica, and I was born there. I was almost born in Spain because my parents met in Spain, got married there, but they decided to go to Costa Rica, and I was born there. And yeah, I grew up that. I don't know what to say, but just a happy family, I would say. It was just my mom and my dad and I, and it was like I didn't have siblings, so I just had to like make friends somewhere. But we grew up not like poor, but we didn't have like a lot of resources. So I was the kid who didn't have cable TV, and being an only child. My dad, he's a musician, so he had to go and play different venues, restaurants, stuff like that. He's a classical guitarist. And my mom, an accountant, she had to go and work, so I spent a lot of time alone, which gave me time to like do stuff, creative stuff. So originally it was like kind of Play-Doh kind of thing. I did like figures with that, and I always drew, always loved to draw, to spend time. And I think that's like what I grew up doing, basically. I didn't pursue art initially because my dad's family, he has like 13 brothers and sisters, and many of them are musicians by trade. Like that's what they studied. And being Costa Rica, a small country, I saw how hard it was for an artist to thrive, and I was scared of that. Like totally honest, I was like, no, I don't want to be one of those starving artists, you know. And it's not that they were starving, but I was afraid of that. At senior year in high school, I had a teacher who was just amazing, but it was a biology teacher. And me being the curious person that I am, I was like, oh, biology is fascinating. I want to be a biologist. So I actually studied 1 year of biology at college, and at the middle...
In Costa Rica.
In Costa Rica, yeah. In the middle of that year, I realized, nope, something's not working. I understand math, I understand chemistry, but, you know, it's not like passionate that I feel about it. I ended up changing careers to graphic design, which was the closest thing to art, but it had like a more kind of like it's more required. More people need designs, you know, logos and pamphlets and whatever, you know, posters and all those things. So I ended up choosing a university that had like a lot of drawing classes, but it was graphic design, the career itself. So I choose that college specifically because I like to draw and I wanted to polish that. And by the end of the career, I try to make a profession, thrive as a graphic designer. It didn't work well. I ended up working in a studio, agency, ad agency, and I didn't like it at all. Yeah. I stayed there like a year, barely, but I wanted to do a master's degree eventually, and I was like, maybe I just need to go on the next level of graphic design and figure this out. But then I was at a art festival there in Costa Rica, and I saw a booth of the Savannah College of Art and Design, and they had this huge encyclopedia. It was a huge book of all the careers that they have, and I was amazed. I want to study everything that they have here. Are you kidding me? They have amusement park design. Is that even a career? So I researched a little bit, and after some prayer and some advice, I had a mentor at the time, and also talking with my mom and all that, I started researching a little bit, and then I made the jump. And it was a huge thing because by the time my parents had gotten divorced when I was 12, so I was not only child but also my mom's only company, mm-hmm. But she was very supportive in all that, and all my friends who had become my second family would be help me to get all the money that we needed to get here.
They did a benefit concert because he was in a band at the time, and they sold CDs, and it was really cool.
Yeah, we made a CD, and all my friends They didn't charge anything. I paid for the rehearsals, but all the profit that went from the concerts and from the CD thing all went for that. So it was a very
community effort.
It was really cool. It was really cool, which gave me the sensation, like I understood really quickly that it was not like a self achievement necessarily. Like, I applied and I got accepted, and I got quite a few scholarships, which was great. But I would have not been able to come here if it was not for the support of my family and friends. So that gave me like a second thing. Like when I started, the day that I arrived, I was like, I'm just gonna do my best. Exactly, which would be my way to say thank you to all of them. And that's what I did. Yeah.
So you have the whole village behind you. It's not just you.
Yeah, and it was tough because I left behind that village, I came here, and for me, I was also like a youth leader for 10 years, and those were the people who became my closest friends, the ones that I call brothers and sisters, like really, After I came here, then I was missing that terribly. So it was tough, of course.
So you didn't know anybody. Did you speak?
I knew one person because, one person from the church that I used to go, actually, his son lived in Savannah, which is where I went, and actually met him, and was my Costa Rican friend there, which, fortunately, he's an amazing person too. He's now living in San Francisco, and I miss him a lot, but it was good to have at least one person. But he was not in the same college, so it's not that... we hang out very often, but at least I had somebody.
Did you speak English?
Yes. That's one thing that my parents were like really good at, and I appreciate a lot. Like since I was a kid, even if we didn't have a lot of resources, they invested in my education since I was very little. So they put me in a private school in Costa Rica, even though I don't know how they did it, because private school is like more expensive than college. And I don't know how they did it, but they did it, and I learned English since I was 7. Like I started classes since I was 7 years old.
And once he arrived in Savannah, he's had to start learning Southern. I recall when he first met my parents, actually. He came...
You didn't see the first impression.
That's true.
Because it was her graduation. I met her like a month before she graduated, and I told her, can I go to your graduation? I would like to be there. And her mom was gonna be there, but she was already inside the place, and I had to wait for her mom because I had the tickets. And when her mom came, she started speaking, and I didn't understand a single word she said. And I had to contain myself because it sounds funny, so I was like, walk.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she has a very,
My mom's from Florida originally, and my dad is from southern Mississippi. And I would say growing up, I had a strong accent too, but over the years, because I've traveled a lot, I realized if you really want people of all places to understand you, you have to kind of train it out a little.
I would never guess you're from southern Mississippi.
Well, it comes out when I'm angry.
Well, you also talk to Caspian in southern.
That's true. The baby talk. When I talk to my baby, it does sound a little... I have to prepare him, too, to be able to understand the rest of the family, so...
All right, so let's talk about your first few days at Savannah School of Art and Design. What was that like for you?
Initially, it was like a rush. It was so exciting. I was taking photos of everything. I was sharing everything on Facebook, and like everybody was hyped about me. Like it was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And like everything that I don't know, I just noticed a cool brick somewhere, and I took a photo of it. Like it was I was just so excited of being there, and it was like a dream. It was cool because I was by myself, because I lived with my mom until I was 25, 6, I think. I also enjoyed being in a very creative environment where everybody is like doing something, has so many different ideas, and everybody is from different places, like people from China, people from India, people from Brazil, and like just all that diversity was very, very cool, because Costa Rica is diverse, but not quite so. Like I had never met an Indian person until I came to the US.
Tell me about your first impressions.
Of the Savannah College of Art and Design. Well, I actually started off at the Atlanta campus, which I was more familiar with because my mom was actually raised in the Atlanta area, so my grandparents are still near Atlanta. So I had actually toured their campus at some point. I wanted to go to SCAD straight out of high school, but I couldn't afford it at the time. I had missed, like, on the testing for it. If I had made 1 point higher, I would have gotten a full ride, but I missed that one thing, and, you know, again, I know that everything worked out for the best. So after I had finished my first degree at another school, I spent some time teaching English in Japan, and I saved up everything that I made there and made plans to come back and go to art school, go to SCAD, go to my dream school. And I'm glad, of course, that it worked out that way, or I wouldn't have met Alejo. So it worked out. So I went straight to Atlanta first, which I had never even been to the Savannah campus because I had just thought, well, if I'm here in Atlanta, I'm close to family. It's not totally different, and it's a big city, so there should be some opportunities here. So funnily enough, I actually came to SCAD with the thought of doing graphic design first as well, because there is that practical side of me, especially my dad is a very practical person, and he was kind of, you know, saying, we just want you to be employed. That's all we want, you know, which is not too much to ask. But I thought, you know, it's still art. It's, you know, it's something that I can probably find a lot of work in, and especially in Atlanta. And so I started off in the graphic design department, and before the end of the first quarter was over, I was realizing I was in the wrong spot. I was at the right school, but in the wrong spot. And it wasn't until one of my graphic design teachers came over to me and saw some of my work and said, "You're an illustrator, aren't you?" She thought that I was an illustration major, so I kind of looked at her like, well, I am now. So later that day, I actually went to change my major.
Well, you did that in Ireland.
You know, it was one of those things where I keep trying.
I'm not going to say anything about you because you might change again.
Well, it's one of those things. They point out that I'm pigeonholing myself. When you label yourself as something and you make decisions based out of fear, they may not be the right ones.
When I was working at that ad agency in Costa Rica, when I applied for it and I showed my portfolio, the guy who was interviewing me, the senior designer there, said that he looked at my portfolio, and looked more like an illustrator portfolio. And I was like, well, it's an illustrator. And I remember by the end of like the last few months that I was there in that ad agency, I was actually drawing storyboards and making sketches that were going to be like shots for different commercials and stuff like that. And I realized that, yeah, like that's
exactly. Let's see, you also mentioned before that you were afraid of that life that your family had of not being employed. So when you make, you know, you have this extreme passion, so you start running toward it, but if you get that little inkling of fear that makes you suddenly kind of divert, you know, and choose something that you feel like might be a safe thing, you know, you're kind of still denying something in you. And so when I realized, hey, illustration is just as viable a career as graphic design, but it's something that I am truly passionate about because I've always loved stories. I'm passionate about books. I love to write. I love to read. And mixing that with what I would say a more kind of classical lean toward art. I love kind of realism-based things, but with a more practical application. I would say one of the first artists that I noticed that I just was passionate about was Alphonse Mucha, who he was the Art Nouveau. He did a lot of advertisements. He was an illustrator. So he did this kind of just beautiful artwork, but it was a practical application of beautiful artwork. And I loved the combination of those two things. So it was a really good fit for me, and I just took off.
All right, yeah, I'm going to jump a little bit because you just made me think of something. So if I were to tell a story, do you start picturing in your mind all the elements of that story and then drawing it? Is that how it works for you?
If you're like hiring for
no, like if I were to say, hey, I have a book, read my book, and you start reading the book, do you picture the characters as you're reading it and draw those?
If I have that freedom to do that, absolutely. I love, if someone can give me the entire manuscript for the book, that is the best thing. I love doing that. So something that we get to do in our work, which is probably some of my favorite work, is doing book covers. Because it's a huge challenge, because this is the first thing that a reader is going to see, and you have to try to encompass their story all in the cover for somebody to be able to kind of look at that. But my favorite thing to do is, as I'm reading the story, pick out small elements that you can somehow work into the cover, so that as you're reading, you kind of pick up on something and go, oh, flip back to the cover, and then suddenly you notice this thing in the cover that you hadn't noticed before. So I really love doing that.
Is that the same for you?
Yeah, even though I have only made one. I've only done one book cover so far. I mostly try to work on editorial pieces. I do like book illustration. Editorial pieces is like for newspapers and magazines and all that. So it's like an article. So it's a short kind of story. You know, it can be informative or it can be just circumstantial, just something that happened to somebody. The cool thing that I like about that is you're also playing with concepts. So you're playing with things that are intangible, like love or sadness. What I like about that is trying to come up with ideas that are not cliche. So I don't have to draw a person crying to express sadness. You know, maybe I'll just draw a river and play with the color, so it gives that emotion. Yeah, I worked some illustrations for the Boston Globe, and it was a lot of stories because there were 8 illustrations about true crime stories. So they wanted me to portray what happened, but not showing anybody. You know, they didn't want to see blood. They didn't want any gory stuff. Nothing. Just a scene that told you the story without being evident, and that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun. Like in some things, I would just like put a shoe lost there, and I would and I had to do research about the time in which this happened, if it happened in the 60s, 70s, and then like what place in the United States it was, and how the vegetation, all those things, and then come up with that. And that was more like realistic in a way, because it was, I was drawing a scene of a street or a landscape or something. That we've been writing stories in a blog, and it's stories from our childhood and illustrating them, and that's kind of like more editorial. In one illustration, I want to express the whole story, and it doesn't have to have all the elements. Like there's one story that I wrote that it's about the time that I broke my arm trying to impress a girl when I was like 10 or something like that, and it was riding a bike. In the story, I talk a lot about how from chivalry, like
knight in shining armor.
Knight, exactly. That I felt like I was so cool with all that. So with the illustration, I drew myself in a bike, but with a helmet. Things that I wasn't wearing a helmet, but I felt like that. So you play with things and juxtapose them so that you can give the idea. And that's what I like, to discover those things that's like, oh, people can like see it, and it's like, oh, I get it now.
It's kind of like creative problem solving, and I think that's what we really like about this job.
Oh yeah, it's fascinating. But let's talk about your first meeting. So you tried to impress that girl with your bike. How did you try to impress Vivian?
First impression that she got from me was not the ideal one.
He came across as nice. It was literally 4:00 in the morning, because it was right near finals, and there were tons of people, not just us, but lots of other people at the school in the middle of the night working on projects together. It's the only way you can stay up that late is if there's other people there. I was there with my friends just working on projects, and I saw him over there working on his stuff, and at the time, he had this really huge, insane beard. It was really, really long, and he had this little beanie on, and he was like smiling and nodding his head the whole time, and I was pretty convinced that he was high on pot, to be perfectly honest. I mean, we're at art school. He's wearing this huge beard. He was so he came up and he was smiling the whole time, like the friendliest person. I just thought, yeah, he's definitely high right now.
What was it like for you?
That first time that we met, it was, I think, in January. There was my 4th month in SCAD, and my first 3 months had been rough. And I actually had like a kind of relationship the first 3 months with somebody that didn't end up well. And that was kind of like, okay, dude, you gotta focus again in school. That's what you came for, and that's what you're gonna do. So like, I actually, with the beginning of the new year, I was like, okay, no, I'm just gonna focus on this. I don't have time to open up to anybody. Plus, most of the people, because I was like 26, something like that, and most of them were like early 20s, and I was like, So I was like, oh, I'm just gonna work. So when I saw her, I was like, oh, she's cute, but I'm doing work, and it's okay, So like I went to talk to them, you and your friends, and make conversation. It was fun and all that, but it didn't go beyond that, you know.
Right.
It was cool also because that day, because Finals has like a thing that's called Pizza Fairy, which is a guy who brings pizza to all of the...
At 4 o'clock in the morning, this guy shows up with a bunch of pizzas it's kind of a morale thing. Everyone's really sleepy and kind of frustrated, and they actually send free pizza around to the poor students. So
I did not know that. That's pretty cool.
it's a really cool thing, yeah.
We actually have a photo together because you were going to take a photo with the Pizza Fairy, and I was like, I want it too!
So this is when you just met.
We had just met. We actually have the photo of our meeting, incidentally, because of the Pizza Fairy. So we can say that a fairy brought us together.
Yeah, that ties everything together. All right, I got Elizabeth Denny with me. Let's talk about Johnny Walker Realty. Since we started Marietta Stories 3 years ago, Johnny Walker Realty has grown tremendously. How's the culture changed?
My big fear in joining a company early stage was if it grew, would that change the culture? Johnny and Carrie have done an amazing job of making sure that everybody who joins Johnny Walker Realty really does follow the major tenets of the company. People who are absolutely customer focused, people who compete only with themselves, and people who understand that even though this is an absolutely high-stress job, you can still have a whole lot of fun doing it if you don't let it get to you.
You can contact Johnny and Carrie. They're at 262 Church Street. You go to JohnnyWalkerRealty.com or call them up at
678-626-0403.
All right, we're going to skip forward a little bit. They did fall in love and they did get married. And I was really curious about what it was like for them to start a business. So you guys took the leap and you're not working. You're working. The name of your company is Two Rivers Creative, correct? All right. So you guys decided to start a business together. And now you have an 8-month-old. Tell me about all those decisions. Who wants to take on that one?
I guess I can start. Yeah. So, I mean, when we first got started, most illustrators are what they call freelancers, where they just work for themselves, essentially. And I had already graduated ahead of time before Alejo had graduated, so I was already working. And then he was, as only a few months after he graduated, we were going to be getting married. And then he would be also a freelancer. And we had realized that there were some opportunities that were coming up because of the complications of international paperwork. That was going to take months and months, and actually ended up taking almost a year or more than a year for all of the paperwork to come through. We realized that for him to be working, he needed to be part of a team. And so I realized pretty quickly we're going to have to work under one name to make this simpler, especially for taxes and things too, so that everything ends up cycling from the same place. And so if we're going to be sharing a bank account, we might as well work together in that. And then when we have all this effort where we're reaching out to clients and where we have our invoices and all these things, that we thought if we just put it all together, then we can speak for each other. It kind of cuts down on the amount of work that we have to do. And because since we can kind of work in tandem with things too, like more recently a book cover that I had come in, some work that had come in from me that involved interior illustrations and a book, like the cover of it itself. It was a lot of work in a very short space of time, so I was able to, kind of lean across my desk toward his desk and say, hey, can you handle the cover while I'm handling the interior illustrations? Because I know his work and I know what his timetable is like and I know what to expect, and we can kind of lean over each other's desks and say, hey, how about we switch this around or try out this color? And so it ended up working out perfectly. And just like that whole concept when we first got married of we're going all in here. It's not just you and me, it's an us, and it's not just us working separately. I mean, sometimes we have completely separate projects, but being able to have a name that we both work under means that work can come in to the one email and one of us can say, hey, this is better suited to your style, or this is something that I know that you're more passionate about, or maybe if you do this part and I'll do that part. So it ends up working out great that way. But maybe Alejo can actually explain how we got our business name. It took a little while to think of something that would work out for us.
Yeah, we did a lot of brainstorm, and we talked about something that we wanted to show, things that we like, things that represent us. We both like nature, so we wanted it to be something that was related to that. Both like books, but she is more a bibliophile than I am, because she has read much more than I have, and actually got more passionate because of her passion. Like, it's contagious to me. Like, we both have really, 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 really in common, you know, and we just made a bunch of ideas. And at some point I thought about my second last name, because my two last name Porras is my first last name, and from my dad, and De los Rios from my mom. De los Rios means from the rivers. We have talked about what name she wanted to have, you know, the last name that she wanted to acquire after we got married and all that. And she had said that she wanted to have De los Rios as her, and she was actually signing some of her artwork already, like Vivian De los Rios or something like that. And so we started, you know, just considering maybe we could have this something of the rivers, and we are two. And then we thought about, you know, just the concept of a river. That's a thing that it's unstoppable, you know, that it's fluid, it doesn't stop with obstacles, it finds its way, it goes all the way to deeper seas and all like that. And it's also strong, you know, while being flexible. And we like all those concepts that represent us. And the fact that two rivers, when they get together, get stronger, it's also something that we felt like it was us. So we ended up saying, how about Two Rivers? And I think it was you who came up with the name, like Two Rivers Creative. Like specifically, I said the river part and you said Two Rivers Creative. But that's how we ended up being. And now we have a stream there sleeping.
Our little 8-month-old stream.
Well, you guys are balancing a lot of stuff. And practically, how do you get most of your work from other people talking about what you've done for them and then telling other folks, or do you use social media, or how do you get the word out?
It's a mix of all those things, and it depends on the work, because Alejo does have a really great gig doing graphic recording, like live graphic artist recording, so actually going to gigs, and he has that under, he works I guess as a subcontractor, the term would be, or as a freelancer with a company out of Atlanta called The Sketch Effect. And
so the Sketch Effect, I applied for it a year ago, and I started working with them a year ago, which is another source of revenue that we have. It's not under Two Rivers. It's something that I just do by myself. So that's one of the things that we have, like part of our artistic life, you know. As Two Rivers Creative, it's still like new, because it's very complicated, you know. Like we not only had to figure out how our work together works, you know, but also that with family and baby, and also with all the tax stuff and legal stuff, permits, how to create, because it's a LLC right now, and we had to go through a lot of stuff to find out, oh, this is the best kind of format that works for us better.
I decided to drill a little bit deeper into how they really like to do work, because freelance work in my mind is a little bit tough to try to find the perfect project. Now, what would you say is the thing that if you had a project about it would be the most exciting for you?
it would probably be illustrating a fantasy novel, both the cover and the interior things, because those are some of my favorite things to read. Like the Lord of the Rings would just be like a dream to do. And I realized, like, for Alejo, that might be something different. What your dream project might be.
Yeah, I mean, it would be really cool to. One of my dream projects is actually to be able to illustrate a book for the Folio Society, which is a publisher in the UK.
What's the name? The
Folio Society. We actually participated in a contest last year, and we were shortlisted for it. We were so close, but still it was a great experience. And this year they're gonna do another one. We're gonna go again and see. Even though books are like really cool, and I would love to do some of those projects, I honestly are like more interested in doing more work more often. So like getting hired for magazines or for newspapers, you know, to illustrate an article, and it's like every week. I would love that, to have that pace, you know, and know that I'm constantly doing some of those illustrations. And
you're stretching yourself, because you got to think about, okay, now I have to set this up. I have to think about all these aspects. So it must be exciting.
Yeah, and I get to do some of the problem-solving thing with the sketch effect, but it's so fast-paced because what I do is basically there's a keynote speaker in a conference, and while this person is speaking, I am drawing the things that he or she is saying. So I'm coming up with ideas as they come. So if they say something about, I don't know, like potentiate the talent in your company, then I can think of like a cannon and like shooting a person that is like, I don't know, something like that, but I have to draw really quick. So I like it because it's very engaging and very fun, you know, and it's stimulating, but it's not that I have like a day to work on that illustration, because I'm very detailed. I work with ink and scratchboard, and my illustrations, I love to just get involved in them and do a lot of textures and all that. And
explain scratchboard real quick.
Okay, so scratchboard is basically like a piece of clay that has been treated with different materials, but basically you put ink over it and then you scratch to get the whites out. You can draw with ink over it, you know, with a quill or with a nib or with a marker even, but the main thing that you do that makes the difference is you're working kind of like in negative, because we tend to draw black things, but when you're thinking about, I'm actually drawing the light, I'm bringing the light on out of this thing. So it's a very interesting process, and you can make textures and lines that are very fine because you work with like an X-Acto knife, you know, doing these things.
It's interesting because it's a very time-consuming process, but he loves to work quickly, so it's really interesting to see this happening.
Yeah.
How long does it take to do like a fairly complicated illustration on scratchboard?
On scratchboard, it takes a while. For newspapers and magazines, for newspapers, I probably wouldn't do scratchboard. I would do just ink because I can go faster with that. I mean, the Boston Glove illustrations were, and that's a newspaper, were scratchboards, but that was a project that took me 5 months. There were 5 months, and there were 8 illustrations. Sometimes it's like 5 days to make one illustration, and sometimes it can be more, and that's not counting necessarily the process of thumbnails and composition and figuring out things before you actually start doing. Because scratchboard is unforgivable. You have to have everything planned out, and you have to make your value compositions to know where light is going to go, where dark is going to go before you actually start working. Because once you do the scratch, like you can cover it with ink, but then there's a dent in you. Like it would ruin it. So.
Which he enjoys doing those, but I feel like he doesn't get to do them as often as he likes because most of the work that he does is so fast paced that he has to turn it around really quickly. So he'll either do something with ink, or he's working digitally using his Wacom drawing tablet.
Yeah. I feel grateful that I'm able to make a living drawing, which is the thing that I like. So no matter the style that I'm using, I still feel that sense of like, I'm just, you know, it's amazing. I'm just doing the thing that I like, and they're paying me for it. So that's great. But if I had the opportunity to make more scratchboard projects, that would be great. That would be amazing.
All right, let's look to wrap things up. So when you guys get up in the morning, how do you feel about, you know, some of these decisions you made in terms of starting a business and having a family? How do you feel when you get up in the morning?
Well, I guess
I have a very quick answer. I just feel hungry.
Yeah, that is how he feels. Yes, he definitely feels hungry.
Yeah, but like that, like physically, metaphorically. Like I feel hungry when I wake up. I need to have breakfast. Well, I need to feed the baby first, and then I need to have breakfast. But I also feel like there's more, you know, and I just want to keep doing. I just want to keep learning. I wake up around 7, sometimes a little bit earlier, because the baby wakes up. I have to feed him up, and when I fed him, then I go downstairs and I make breakfast for her. And while I'm making breakfast, I'm listening to podcasts, I'm listening to things about business, about marketing, about art, so that I keep learning, and I'm trying to apply those things to our business, or to life in general. So every day for me is like I'm just trying to learn more. Sometimes it can be overwhelming because I'm like, we haven't done this thing. How about we do this? How about we figure this out? And then I go to a website and I stay like 4 hours redesigning their website.
He's a very intense and fast-paced person, which is funny because I'm a lot more stop and smell the roses, and I enjoy things like gardening, and I'm a lot more. If he's the river, he's like the whitewater rapids, and I'm more the lazy river that has a lot of the kind of eddies on the side. And
you smell the roses and plant veggies to eat them.
Well, how do you feel in the morning?
I actually honestly feel I wake up happy every day knowing that I get to do something that I never thought I'd really be able to do. I get up, and for one thing, my husband has made me breakfast, which is an awesome way to wake up in the morning. And then baby is already awake and happy and giggly and fun. And I just think I'm so intensely lucky to be able to see my baby growing up, to see my husband every day, to share this stuff with somebody that's just as passionate about creativity and artwork as I am. And I mean, yeah, there's definitely those days where we start to feel a little bit of cabin fever, where we're like, we need to get out, we need to see people, we need to do something, and you have to make those specific plans to make sure that you're not cutting yourself off from the rest of the world. But just being able to have this and just knowing that every day could bring something different and new, and that since we know that we're intentionally not pigeonholing ourselves, we're not limiting ourselves, that what the business looks like this year could be completely different from what it looks like next year and the year after that, and that's extremely exciting.
That's the cool thing about having a small business, that you can change very quickly, and
you're not tied to a brick and mortar where you have a thing in the front that says this is what we do.
Yeah, exactly. And we are free to experiment.
Artists. Yeah. I mean, you say if we're artists, that can cover a lot of bases.
Exactly. So that might come up to some people maybe as like we might not have. Like in social media, for example, which is one of the things that we started struggling when we started, was like, so what is our identity? Because some people have their portfolio and everything looks kind of like cohesive and all that, and we make a lot of different stuff because we enjoy experimenting. So at the beginning it was frustrating because we felt like we had to have one style. And then we were like, well, I mean, who says that, and why should we comply to that when we find this joy doing these different things? So it might be hard for some clients to come and say like, okay, we want you to do this kind of thing, but you do a lot of different things. So we don't need to convince them necessarily. We just show them the things that we can do, and they're like, oh, okay, you can do that thing. Okay, I feel safe, on hiring you. But we're also free to say like, we don't do those kind of things, and that's fine. I feel like as long as we are able to say or to do kind of work that that pushes us in a way, that it's not super comfortable necessarily, that we can experiment with different techniques, and then we have cool topics that we can explore, that we have this freedom also to work at our own pace from home. The best thing of that is like, and at least I chose this kind of life of being like working from home, because when I was a teenager and I started thinking about the kind of dad that I wanted to be a dad who was there. I wanted to see my kid grow, and I didn't want to miss it. So being here, even though it can be difficult, being there for my son, even though it's hard sometimes, because it's hard to concentrate if you have a baby tumbling around, and crying, needing you every 10 seconds, sometimes it can be a little bit frustrating, because, it is. We don't have the everything solved, and I think nobody ever has anything, like everything solved permanently. I see those struggles as the flavor of life. They make things interesting. We always have something to figure out, and that keeps us going. And we're glad that we can have this kind of life that is not perfect, but it's perfect for us. And I feel very grateful for that.
All right, so how do folks get a hold of you?
You can find both of our work together on the same website at tworiverscreative.com, and you can find links to our other work, the stuff that we do separately, on that website as well.
Well, I think it's absolutely beautiful. I really fell in love with the stuff you had shown at the Sewell Mill. It's beautiful. It's detailed. It's hand-drawn, which is another really cool thing. And you can tell you guys are doing the right thing for yourselves and for your families, and it's just great to be around you, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share a story, and it's great that we get to meet you there and talk for a while. Yeah. So I hope that if anybody who is listening who has this kind of journey of wants to be an artist or just wants to pursue something that they're passionate about, but have some fear because they want to feel safe, I hope they get encouraged with that. It's good to take some faith steps. Yeah.
Sometimes you just gotta leap into things. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the Marietta Stories podcast. Contact us at bill@mariettastories.com to let us know your show ideas. And don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play so you don't miss an episode.